twin suns cast interweaving shafts of amber and crimson through the dense canopy of Lyrash's ancient forest. Massive trees with deep purple bark stretched skyward, their boughs adorned with bioluminescent fungi and flowers that pulsed with gentle light even in daytime. Translucent winged creatures fluttered between the branches, their delicate membranes catching the dual sunlight and fracturing it into prismatic rainbows. The forest breathed around her. Keela could feel its rhythm in her bones as she moved silently across a thick branch, her bare feet finding secure purchase on the rough bark. Her indigo skin, adorned with luminescent tribal markings that snaked across her shoulders and down her arms, blended perfectly with the shadows. Years of training with the clan's master hunters had honed her movements to perfect stealth. Perched 30 meters above the forest floor, Keela surveyed her domain with eyes adapted to detect the slightest movement. Her hand rested on the hilt of a bone-handled knife strapped to her thigh, beside a quiver of poison-tipped darts. On her back, a lightweight spear crafted from the heartwood of a thunder tree waited for its moment. All weapons were blessed by the clan's spiritual guardian and had tasted the blood of many prey. But today's quarry was unlike any she had hunted before. The Council of Elders had summoned her 3 dawns ago to the sacred meeting grove. Elder Theris, her face weathered by 200 cycles, had spoken with uncharacteristic urgency. Sky metal has fallen in the western reaches, the elder had said, her voice like dried leaves rustling. And with it comes an outsider, an off-worlder. Keela had felt her blood run cold. The legend spoke of star travelers, pale-skinned demons who coveted Lyrash's resources, who had once before, generations ago, brought destruction in their wake. The signs are clear, Elder Theris continued. This intruder moves with purpose toward our sacred grounds. Before others of its kind follow, before they bring their machines and poison, you must track this creature and eliminate the threat. Keela had bowed her head. I'm honored by your trust, Elder. You are our finest hunter, Keela. Your mother would be proud. Pride had welled in her chest at those words. Since her mother's death during a hunt 5 cycles ago, Keela had worked relentlessly to honor her memory, to become the warrior her mother had believed she could be. Now, as she stalked through the forest canopy, that same pride fueled her resolve. She had been tracking the off-worlder for 2 days. Unlike the clumsy outsiders of legend, this one moved with surprising competence through the forest. He avoided most of the basic natural hazards, leaving minimal trace of his passage. But to Keela's trained eye, the signs were clear. Broken spider silk strands, disturbed ground moss, and the subtle alarm calls of forest creatures that sensed a foreign presence. The off-worlder was searching for something. Several times she had observed him consulting a small device that emitted soft blue light, then adjusting his course. Each adjustment brought him closer to the ancient ruins that housed her people's most sacred relics. That cannot be allowed. She caught movement below, a flash of artificial material, colors that did not belong in the forest palette. Keela froze, becoming one with the branch beneath her. The off-worlder came into view, moving with cautious determination. His skin was pale like sun-bleached bone, his head covered with short, dark hair. He wore close-fitting garments of muted green and brown that, while not as effective as her natural camouflage, showed an understanding of stealth principles. A small pack was strapped to his back, and various devices hung from his belt. He carried no obvious weapons, but Keela wasn't fooled. The legend spoke of invisible fire that off-worlders could summon. She observed his movements, cataloging weaknesses. Though he moved quietly for an outsider, his footfalls still betrayed unfamiliarity with the forest floor's composition. He favored his right side slightly, an old injury perhaps. Most importantly, he was alone, separated from any technology that might give him true advantage. Keela moved forward, sliding along the branch with practiced ease. She positioned herself directly above his path, calculating the angle of her strike. Her fingers curled around her spear, muscles tensing in preparation. 3 heartbeats before she would have launched her attack, the off-worlder suddenly stopped. His head tilted slightly, like a Lomar beast sensing danger. Then, deliberately, he looked up, not quite at her position, but close enough to send a chill down Keela's spine. "I know you're there," he said in a calm, clear voice. The words were in the common trade language of the southern coastal tribes, a dialect Keela understood but rarely used. "I've known for hours." She remained motionless, her breathing so shallow it wouldn't disturb a single leaf. The off-worlder turned slowly in a circle, scanning the canopy. "You're good," he continued. "Very good. But I've been hunted by experts before." His eyes passed over her position without lingering. He hadn't spotted her exact location then, but he knew he was being tracked. "I'm not here to harm anyone," he said. "I'm just trying to recover something. After that, I'll be gone." Lies, Keela thought. The off-worlders always lied. They came with soft words and left with pillaged resources and broken promises. The elders' histories were clear on this. She adjusted her grip on her spear, muscles coiled and ready. The off-worlder took another step forward, bringing him directly beneath her position. The perfect striking point. She silently raised her spear. One swift movement, and her mission would be complete. The clan would celebrate her success, perhaps even grant her a seat among the junior council members. But as she prepared to strike, the off-worlder did something unexpected. He knelt down, placing both palms on the forest floor, and closed his eyes. The gesture was so similar to the clan's ritual of respect for the forest that Keela hesitated, her spear poised in midair. In that moment of hesitation, he spoke again. "I know you're about to strike from above, but we both have bigger problems right now." He opened his eyes and looked directly at her position with unnerving accuracy. "You climbed that tree to kill me, but I've been waiting below, knowing that you're already being hunted yourself." A cold dread washed over Keela. How could he know? Before she could react, a distant sound reached her ears, a rhythmic clicking that made her blood freeze. The skull-faced night stalkers never ventured this deep into the forest during daylight hours, unless they were driven by a greater hunger. The off-worlder nodded grimly, as if confirming her worst fears. "They're coming, and they're not hunting just me anymore." Keela's mind raced. The off-worlder was her prey, her mission. But night stalkers were death incarnate, and if they were hunting in packs during daylight, her mission might have just become far more complicated. Jonas Varda had known he was being tracked since his first day on this godforsaken planet. 15 years as a Frontier Corps operative had honed his survival instincts to near-prescient levels. He could almost feel the hunter's eyes on his back, cataloging his weaknesses, planning the kill. The locals were impressive. That much was certain. Their adaptation to this environment was seamless, their technology deceptively simple but effective. After his escape pod had crashed 3 days ago, he'd observed them from a distance, noting their surprising agility and the respect with which they treated the forest. When he detected his shadow yesterday, he'd been impressed by the hunter's stealth. If not for the specialized training he'd received for the Pavonis 3 mission, where the native population could perfectly mimic the surrounding vegetation, he might never have noticed his tracker. Now, as he knelt on the forest floor, he kept his breathing steady despite the approaching danger. The clicking sounds were growing louder, the same sounds he'd heard the night before, when he'd witnessed a pack of predators take down a creature twice his size with terrifying efficiency. He had a pulsar sidearm holstered under his jacket, but only one charge cell remaining. His emergency beacon was damaged in the crash, and the critical component he needed to repair was somewhere in this area, according to his tracker. The mission parameters had suddenly shifted from recovery to immediate survival. The hunter in the trees hadn't moved, despite his warning. Pride, perhaps, or disbelief. Either way, they were running out of time. "I count at least 6 of them," he said, keeping his voice calm and low. "They're driving us toward the ravine to the west. Standard pack hunting strategy. They'll cut off our retreat options and force us into a kill zone." He slowly rose to his feet, careful to make no sudden movements. "I don't care why you're hunting me. Right now, we both need to get a higher ground or dense cover. Those skull faces will tear through either of us alone." Still no response from above. Fine. He tried. Jonas unholstered his pulsar, keeping it pointed toward the undergrowth where the clicking was growing louder. Last chance. Temporary truce? Or we both die here. The air shifted behind him, the only warning before he felt the cold press of metal against his throat. He hadn't even heard the hunter descend from the tree. Move toward the risen roots. A voice hissed in his ear. Female, with an accent that twisted the trade language into something musical despite the deadly intent behind it. Slowly, the Night Stalkers fear the thunder root sap. Jonas nodded carefully against the blade. Smart play. Silence, off-worlder. This is not alliance. This is survival. He didn't argue as she directed him toward a massive tree with exposed roots that created a natural barricade. The roots, thicker than his torso, formed a cage-like structure around the tree's base. A clear, amber fluid oozed from some of the bark, emitting a faint crackling sound and a smell like ozone after a lightning strike. As they reached the root structure, Jonas got his first clear look at his hunter. She was tall and lithe, her indigo skin adorned with luminescent tribal markings that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Her features were humanoid, but distinctly alien. Eyes slightly larger than human norm, with vertical pupils that adjusted visibly as she assessed him. Her hair, if it could be called that, resembled fine metallic filaments that shifted color with her movements. She wore minimal clothing, a fitted garment that left her arms and legs free from movement, adorned with what appeared to be tokens or trophies from successful hunts. Multiple weapons were strapped to her body, all crafted from natural materials, but clearly lethal. Most striking were her eyes, fierce, intelligent, and filled with unconcealed contempt. Inside, she commanded, gesturing to a gap between the roots barely wide enough for them to slip through. Jonas complied, squeezing through the opening into a space beneath the massive tree where the root structure created a natural shelter. The hunter followed, her movements fluid and silent. No sooner had they entered the shelter than the first of the night stalkers emerged from the undergrowth. The creatures were nightmarish, six-limbed predators with elongated, eyeless heads that resembled bleached skulls. Their bodies were covered in chitinous plates that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Each of their 6 limbs ended in hooked claws designed for grasping and tearing. As one approached the thunder tree, a root dripped sap near its path. The amber fluid sizzled upon contact with the ground, and the creature immediately backed away, emitting a high-pitched screech that made Jonas wince. The stalkers circled the tree, clicking and screeching, but maintained their distance from the roots and the caustic sap. They will wait, the hunter said quietly. Night stalkers are patient. They have marked our scents. How long before they lose interest? Jonas asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. They won't. Not with 2 prey trapped. She kept her knife ready, her eyes fixed on the creatures. Why are they hunting during high sun? This is not their nature. Jonas weighed how much to reveal. They might have been drawn to something. Unusual energy signatures can affect predator behavior. Her eyes narrowed. Energy signatures from your crash. Your technology has disrupted the forest balance. Possibly, he admitted, or something else entirely. They fell silent as the largest of the stalkers approached their hiding place. Its skull face pressed close to the gap they'd squeezed through. It inhaled deeply, the sound unnervingly similar to a human drawing breath. For a moment, it seemed to stare directly at them, despite its lack of visible eyes. Then it withdrew, rejoining the others in their circular patrol. I'm Jonas, he said after a moment, figuring they might as well get acquainted during their forced proximity. She didn't look at him. Names have power. You don't deserve mine. Fair enough. Then what should I call you when I need to warn you that one of those things is about to rip your throat out? She shot him a venomous glance. Keela, but when we escape these predators, remember that I am still your predator, off-worlder. Noted. Jonas checked his pulsar's charge, still at 18%, enough for one good shot, if absolutely necessary. For what it's worth, I really am just trying to recover something and leave. I have no interest in your people or your resources. Keela made a dismissive sound. Your kind always says this, before the destruction begins. My kind? Jonas raised an eyebrow. You've met many humans? The elders remember. Skymetal fell before many generations passed. The pale outsiders came with promises and left with plunder and death. Her grip tightened on her knife. I will not allow this to happen again. Jonas processed this new information. First contact gone wrong generations ago. That explained the hostility, though not why this region of space was marked as unexplored in core records. Something didn't add up. A sudden, violent screech from outside interrupted his thoughts. The stalkers were becoming agitated, their circular movements more erratic. Something's changed, Keela whispered, tensing. Jonas strained to hear beyond the stalkers' clicking. Then he caught it, the faint but distinctive sound of humanoid movement through undergrowth. Not as stealthy as Keela, but not clumsy either. More of your people? He asked. Keela's expression hardened. No, the exile ones come. Before Jonas could ask for clarification, 3 figures burst from the undergrowth, wielding crude but effective-looking weapons. Their appearance was similar to Keela's, but where her markings were precise and symmetrical, theirs were chaotic, jagged lines and spirals that covered more of their bodies. Their eyes reflected light, like a predator's in darkness. Most concerning was what one of them carried, a device that Jonas recognized immediately as salvage from a core shuttle. Not as escape pod, but definitely human technology. The Night Stalkers immediately turned their attention to the newcomers, who responded by throwing what appeared to be chunks of meat away from their position. The Stalkers pursued the offerings, creating momentary chaos. Bone hunters, Keela whispered, exiled from all clans for blood crimes. They consume the essence of what they kill, believing it gives them power. Her voice took on a new edge of hatred. They are abominations. The bone hunters moved with practiced coordination, using the distracted stalkers to advance closer to the thunder tree. One of them called out in a language Jonas didn't recognize, but the mocking tone was universal. Keela responded with what sounded like a ritual insult, her body coiled with tension. Friends of yours? Jonas murmured. The leader, Vroctes, was cast out by my clan for eating the heart of his hunt brother, she replied tightly. He has sworn to take the heart of a council elder in return. And now he hunts anything of value, including off-worlders and their technology. She glanced at Jonas. They must have detected your crash. They've been collecting your people's remnants for cycles. That explained the core technology. But it raised even more questions about previous human presence on this world. Another call from the bone hunters, followed by laughter. What were they saying? Jonas asked. Keela's expression was grim. They say we can choose. Be food for the stalkers or trophies for them. Charming options. Jonas assessed their situation. The Thunder Tree provided protection from the Night Stalkers, but it had also trapped them. The Bone Hunters seemed content to wait, knowing they had the advantage. They want your Sky Medal, Keela said suddenly, and my status as Council Chosen. Either would elevate Vroctes in the eyes of his followers. Jonas watched the Bone Hunters as they established positions around the tree, careful to stay away from both the Stalkers and the caustic sap. They were settling in for a siege. These Bone Hunters, he said thoughtfully. How well do they work together? Keela gave him a sidelong glance. They fight for dominance among themselves. Vroctes maintains control through fear and ritual. So they're not a cohesive unit. No, they are bound by convenience, not loyalty. Jonas nodded slowly. That gives us an opening. He turned to face her fully. I know you want to kill me when this is over. But right now, we need each other. You know, this forest and these people. I have combat experience against multiple opponents. Keela was silent for a long moment, her large eyes unreadable. Finally, she said, what do you propose, off-worlder? Jonas smiled grimly. Something neither the Stalkers nor your exiled friends out there will expect. Keela watched the off-worlder, Jonas, as he outlined his plan. It was bold, perhaps foolhardy, but it played to their respective strengths. Despite herself, she was impressed by his tactical thinking. As the twin suns began their descent, casting long shadows through the forest, she found herself reluctantly reassessing her quarry. He was not what she had expected. The elders had described off-worlders as arrogant, destructive beings who saw the forest and its people as resources to be exploited. While she still didn't trust Jonas's ultimate motives, his immediate behavior contradicted the elders' warnings. The thunder root sap, he was saying, pointing to the amber fluid dripping from the bark above them. You said the stalkers fear it. Can it be collected? Used as a weapon? Keela nodded. It burns flesh, but not plant matter. My people use hollow reeds to collect it for hunting larger prey. She reached into a small pouch at her waist and withdrew several empty seed pods. These will hold small amounts. Perfect. And these bone hunters, will they know to avoid it? Yes. All who dwell in the forest respect Thunderroot. Jonas nodded, processing this information. Then we'll need to be more creative with how we use it. As they prepared, carefully collecting sap in the seed pods using stripped bark as improvised tools, Keela found herself studying the off-worlder more closely. His movements were precise, economical, trained rather than instinctive, but effective nonetheless. The slight favoring of his right side that she'd noticed earlier was indeed from an old injury. She could now see a faded scar peeking from the collar of his garment. You said you were recovering something, she said finally. What item is worth risking death on an unknown world? Jonas glanced at her, then back to his work. A communications component. Without it, I can't signal for extraction. And when your people come to extract you, what then? He seemed to understand the real question. Then I leave. Alone. This planet isn't a designated contact zone. Official first contact protocols would prevent any colonization or resource extraction. Keela frowned. First contact? Your kind has been here before. The elders remember. That's what doesn't make sense, Jonas replied. According to core records, this star system was only charted 30 years ago, and no landing parties were ever dispatched. He hesitated, then added, either your elders are mistaken about the identity of these previous visitors, or someone outside official channels has been here. The implication hung between them. If off-worlders had come to Lyrash without the knowledge of Jonas's people, what had been their purpose? Before Keela could pursue this troubling thought, a change in the bone hunter's movements caught her attention. They were preparing for something. Vroctes grows impatient, she whispered. The night approaches when stalkers are strongest. He will move soon. Jonas nodded, sealing the last of their improvised sap containers. Then so do we. Remember, when I create the diversion, you take the high route. Hit them from where they least expect it. Keela met his eyes. And if I simply leave you to die, off-worlder? He held her gaze steadily. Then you'll never know why your elder's history doesn't match mine, or what these bone hunters have been doing with core technology. A faint smile touched his lips. Besides, you still want the honor of killing me yourself, don't you? Despite herself, Keela felt the corner of her mouth twitch. The off-worlder had courage and wit, qualities her people respected. Very well, Jonas of the Core. Let us hunt together. She extended her arm, wrist up, in the traditional gesture of a temporary hunt bond. After a brief hesitation, he clasped her wrist with his hand. His skin was warmer than hers, almost feverishly so, but his grip was firm. On my signal, he said. Keela nodded, gathering her weapons. Whatever came next, this would be a hunt worthy of the songs. The plan was simple in concept, complex in execution. Jonas would create a distraction using one of the seed pods filled with thunderroot sap, drawing attention to one side of the tree. In the ensuing chaos, Keela would slip out the opposite side and scale the tree, positioning herself for an aerial attack. Jonas would then push out, engaging directly with any bone hunters that approached while keeping the Night Stalkers at bay with strategic deployments of the remaining sap. As the forest dimmed with approaching dusk, the clicks and screeches of the Night Stalkers grew more confident. The creatures were naturally nocturnal. Darkness would only embolden them. Jonas checked his pulsar one last time, then nodded to Keela. He took a deep breath, then hurled one of the seed pods through a gap in the roots, aiming for a point midway between the largest concentration of stalkers and the bone hunter leader, Vroctes. The pod burst on impact, splattering amber fluid in a wide arc. The effect was immediate. stalkers screeched and recoiled from the burning sap, while the bone hunter shouted in alarm and confusion. Now, Jonas hissed, and Keela was already moving, slipping through a narrow gap between roots on the opposite side of their shelter. With preternatural agility, she leapt upward, catching a low-hanging vine and using it to swing herself onto a branch. Jonas didn't wait to see her complete her ascent. As soon as she was clear, he pushed through the root barrier, pulsar in one hand and a sap-filled pod in the other. He needed to be visible enough to maintain the bone hunter's attention without making himself an easy target. A stalker lunged at him immediately, its eyeless head tracking his movement through some sense he couldn't identify. Jonas hurled his prepared pod directly at the creature's face. The sap splashed across its skull-like visage, and the stalker reared back with a shriek of pain, colliding with one of its pack mates in its frenzy. Jonas used the momentary chaos to dart toward a fallen log, keeping the thunder tree in sight. He needed to maintain proximity to its protective influence while drawing the bone hunters into the open. He didn't have to wait long. A projectile, some kind of dart, embedded itself in the log inches from his position. Jonas ducked lower, scanning for the shooter. There, one of the bone hunters had separated from his companions, seeking a flanking position. Perfect. Jonas feigned greater alarm than he felt, making a show of scrambling for better cover. The bone hunter, sensing weakness, pursued more boldly. From his peripheral vision, Jonas could see Keela moving through the canopy, silent and deadly, positioning herself above the hunting party's leader. The pursuing bone hunter raised a crude but effective-looking weapon, a launcher of some kind, possibly designed for the darts Jonas had already encountered. Before he could fire, Jonas rolled suddenly toward him rather than away, closing the distance with unexpected speed. The bone hunter faltered at this unconventional tactic, his weapon momentarily dropping. It was all the opening Jonas needed. He drove his shoulder into the exile's midsection, simultaneously twisting the weapon from his grasp. They grappled briefly, but Jonas had the advantage of surprise and combat training. A precise strike to the nerve cluster he hoped existed in the same location as Inhumans dropped the bone hunter to his knees. Jonas followed with a knockout blow to the temple, careful to modulate his strength. He needed a distraction, not a killing. As the exile crumpled, Jonas heard Vroctes shout something in his native language. The leader had spotted Keela in the canopy. Her element of surprise was compromised. Jonas needed to act fast. He raised the pulsar, not aiming at any of the bone hunters, but at a massive seed pod hanging from a branch near their position. The shot would cost him his weapon's remaining charge, but if timed correctly, he fired. The energy pulse struck the pod, which burst open, releasing a cloud of fine, irritating spores. Jonas had noticed similar pods earlier during his trek through the forest and had observed how forest creatures universally avoided them. The effect was immediate. The bone hunters caught in the cloud began coughing and clawing at their eyes. The night stalkers, with their heightened senses, reacted even more violently, several of them charging blindly through the area, no longer avoiding the bone hunters. In the chaos, Keela dropped from above, landing directly behind Vroctes. The exile leader sensed her at the last moment, whirling with unexpected speed, a wicked blade in his hand. Keela deflected his first strike with her spear shaft, but the force of the blow pushed her back a step. Vroctes pressed his advantage, his fighting style wild and unpredictable compared to Keela's disciplined movements. Jonas started toward them, then froze as a night stalker emerged from the spore cloud directly in his path. The creature's skull face turned toward him, jaws opening to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. With the pulsar drained, Jonas had only his hand-to-hand training and the remaining sap pods. As the stalker tensed to spring, Jonas feinted left, then dodged right, hurling a pod directly at the junction where the creature's limbs met its body, what he hoped was a vulnerable point. The sap splashed across the chitinous plates, finding gaps in the natural armor. The stalker convulsed, emitting a high-pitched keen that hurt Jonas's ears. He didn't wait to see if the injury was debilitating. Using the fallen log as a springboard, He vaulted past the distracted creature, running toward the fight between Keela and Vroctes. The exile leader had Keela pinned against a tree trunk, his superior strength evident as he pressed his blade slowly toward her throat. Keela was resisting fiercely, but her position offered poor leverage. Jonas scooped up a heavy branch as he ran. "Hey, ugly!" he shouted, drawing Vroctes' attention for a crucial split second. It was enough. Keela drove her knee up into the exile's midsection, simultaneously pushing against his blade arm. Vroctes staggered back, and before he could recover, Jonas swung the branch with all his strength, connecting solidly with the bone hunter's head. Vroctes crumpled, but not before slashing out blindly with his blade. Jonas felt a searing pain across his ribs, but kept his footing. The others, Keela gasped, already recovering her battle stance. The remaining bone hunters were regrouping, rage evident in their postures as they saw their fallen leader. The Night Stalkers, too, were reorganizing, some pursuing the fleeing exiles who had been caught in the spore cloud, others circling back toward Jonas and Keela. "Time for Phase 2, Jonas said, pressing a hand to his bleeding side. Keela nodded, eyes darting to his wound before refocusing on the threats around them. "The ravine path. It's our only chance." They ran, Jonas following Keela's lead as she picked a route that kept them close to thunder trees when possible. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew, both the clicking of stalkers and the shouts of bone hunters. The forest floor began to slope downward, and soon they were running along a narrow ridge that overlooked a deep ravine. Far below, a river glinted in the last rays of the setting suns. "Where are we going?" Jonas asked. His breathing labored from exertion and pain. "Sacred caves," Keela replied without slowing. "They connect to the ancient chambers. And those are the place your tracking device has been leading you." Before Jonas could question her further, a dart whistled past his ear. The bone hunters were closing the gap. There, Keela pointed to a narrow opening in the cliff face ahead, barely visible behind a curtain of hanging vines. "Once inside, we can collapse the entrance." They sprinted the final distance, more darts falling around them. As they reached the cave entrance, Jonas glanced back to see both bone hunters and stalkers in pursuit, an unholy alliance formed by mutual bloodlust. Inside the cave, Keela immediately moved to what appeared to be a support pillar. Not natural, Jonas realized, but constructed, though so ancient that it had become almost indistinguishable from the surrounding stone. "Help me," she commanded, throwing her weight against the pillar. Jonas joined her, ignoring the protest from his injured side. Together, they pushed against the ancient stone. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a groan like a slumbering giant awakening, the pillar shifted. Dust and small stones rained down from the ceiling. "Again," Keela urged. They pushed once more, and this time the pillar gave way completely. A section of the cave ceiling collapsed, sending a cascade of rock and earth down across the entrance. The timing was perfect, or nearly so. As the last rays of light from outside were extinguished, Jonas caught a glimpse of a night stalker lunging through the gap. Then darkness enveloped them. The sounds of scrabbling claws and an enraged screech came from the darkness where the entrance had been. Jonas blindly reached for Keela, finding her arm. "Is it inside with us?" he whispered. "Yes," she breathed back. "Don't move." They stood frozen as the stalker's clicks and movements echoed in the darkness. The creature was disoriented by the cave-in, but very much alive. Slowly, deliberately, Keela reached into a pouch at her belt. Jonas heard a soft scraping sound. Then a faint glow illuminated her face as she activated some kind of bioluminescent material. The pale blue light revealed the stalker barely 5 meters away, its skull face turning toward them at the sudden illumination. The creature tensed, preparing to spring. In one fluid motion, Keela drew back her arm and hurled her last sap-filled pod directly at the stalker. Her aim was perfect. The pod burst against the creature's face. As it reared back, screeching in agony, Keela lunged forward with her spear, driving the point through what appeared to be a sensory organ in the center of its skull-like head. The stalker convulsed once, then collapsed. Jonas exhaled slowly. Impressive. Keela retrieved her spear, wiping it clean on the stalker's hide. The entrance is sealed. The others cannot follow. She raised her light, illuminating a tunnel that led deeper into the cliff. But we must move quickly. These caves connect to the sacred chambers, but they also house other dangers. Lead on, Jonas said, wincing as he probed his injured side. The cut was painful, but not deep enough to be life-threatening. Keela noticed his discomfort. After a moment of hesitation, she reached into another pouch and withdrew a small bundle of leaves. For the wound, she said, offering them to him. Chew them to a paste and apply it. They will numb the pain and prevent infection. Jonas accepted the leaves with a nod of thanks. Not planning to let me bleed out, then? I told you, off-worlder. When we escape these hunters, I remain your hunter. A ghost of smile touched her lips. It would be poor form to claim a weakened prey. As they moved deeper into the cave system, the blue glow from Keela's light revealed ancient carvings on the walls, symbols and figures that reminded Jonas of star charts. His core training included basic xenoarchaeology, enough to recognize that these markings were sophisticated representations of celestial bodies. Some symbols were familiar, constellations visible from this region of space, while others depicted what could only be spacecraft. Your people made these? He asked quietly, running his fingers over a particularly detailed etching of what appeared to be a vessel unlike any core design he'd seen. Keela nodded. The ancestor records. They tell of the time before, when my people traveled among stars. She pointed to a series of images that depicted figures similar to her own species descending to a planet's surface. We were not always of Lyrash. The elders teach that our ancestors came from beyond, fleeing a great darkness. Jonas absorbed this revelation. You're descended from space travelers. That explains your adaptability to this environment. Your ancestors likely engineered themselves to thrive here. Keela gave him a sharp look. We were born of Lyrash's embrace. The forest shaped us, not machines. Jonas decided not to argue the point. Cultural evolution often rewrote technological origins into spiritual narratives, but it raised interesting questions about the off-worlders. In the elders' stories, if Keela's people were themselves originally from elsewhere, who were these other visitors they feared? They continued deeper, the passage gradually widening into a series of interconnected chambers. The air grew warmer, with a faint scent of minerals and ozone. The carvings became more elaborate, now interspersed with inlays of crystalline material that caught Keela's light and reflected it in prismatic patterns. We approached the heart chamber, Keela said, her voice taking on a reverent quality. Few of my people are permitted to enter. Only council elders and chosen hunters tasked with its protection. And yet you're bringing me there, Jonas observed. The alternative was to kill you on the forest floor, she replied matter-of-factly. I may yet fulfill that duty. But first, I would understand why your tracking device leads here. What do your people seek in our sacred place? Before Jonas could respond, they emerged into a vast cavern that took his breath away. The ceiling soared at least 30 meters above them, its surface embedded with thousands of bioluminescent organisms that created the illusion of a starscape. The floor was polished smooth, with intricate patterns inlaid in materials that glowed with subtle energy. But it was the center of the chamber that commanded attention. There, upon a raised dais, stood what appeared to be a control console of some kind. Its design was elegant yet unmistakably technological, with surfaces that shifted with flowing patterns of light. Around the dais, arranged in a perfect circle, were 13 crystalline pillars, each pulsing gently with its own internal light. Jonas's tracking device began emitting a soft, insistent tone. He drew it from his pocket, staring at the readout in disbelief. This is it, he breathed. But it's not what I expected. Keela moved to stand between him and the central dais, her spear held ready. Explain yourself, off-worlder. What does your machine tell you? Jonas held up the tracker so she could see the display. I was searching for a quantum resonance node, a critical component for my communication system. The readings suggest it's here, integrated into that central structure. He nodded toward the console. But this isn't salvage or debris from my crash. This is something far older and more sophisticated. Keela's expression remained guarded, but curiosity flickered in her eyes. The heart of knowing, we call it. The elders come here to commune with the ancestors, to seek guidance in times of great need. She hesitated, then added, "It is said that in the time of my grandmother's grandmother, the heart showed visions of sky metal falling and pale destroyers emerging. That is why we have watched the skies with caution ever since." Jonas approached the circle of pillars slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements that might provoke Keela. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the central console. After a long moment, she nodded once, though she maintained a ready stance. As Jonas stepped between the crystalline pillars, he felt a subtle change in the air, a charge like the moment before lightning strikes. The console's flowing patterns of light accelerated, responding to his presence. His tracker's tone changed pitch, becoming more urgent. "Incredible," he murmured, studying the console's surface. "This is precursor technology, or something very similar." "Precursor?" Keela asked, the unfamiliar word drawing her closer despite her caution. "An ancient space-faring civilization. They vanished thousands of years ago, but left behind artifacts and installations throughout this sector of space." Jonas ran his hands just above the console's surface, not quite touching it. Core scientists have been studying their technology for decades, but functioning systems like this are extremely rare. Keela's brow furrowed. "You knew this was here?" "No," Jonas shook his head. "I was tracking a quantum resonance signature compatible with my communications equipment. I had no idea it would lead to something like this." He looked up at her. "But I think I understand now. The stories your elders tell of previous off-worlders, they weren't my people. They were scavengers, salvagers who hunt for precursor technology. They must have detected this installation, but were driven off by your ancestors." Before Keela could respond, a new sound echoed through the chamber. Voices and footsteps approaching from another passage. "Impossible," Keela hissed, spinning toward the sound. "The sacred paths are protected by what we took from your precious temples long ago," a harsh voice interrupted. Vroctes emerged from a side tunnel, blood crusted on his temple from Jonas's earlier blow. Behind him came 4 more bone hunters, all armed and radiating malice. "Did you think we spent our exile in ignorance, Council Pet? We have found many paths your elders have forgotten." Jonas tensed, cursing himself for not confirming Vroctes was truly incapacitated back in the forest. The exile leader's survival complicated an already dangerous situation. Vroctes stepped further into the chamber, his gaze shifting between Keela, Jonas, and the central console. In his hand, he held something that made Jonas's blood run cold. A crude but functional energy weapon cobbled together from core technology. The design was unmistakable, though it had been modified with local materials. "The off-worlder's metal," Vroctes said, noticing Jonas's recognition. "We have collected many pieces over the cycles, learned many secrets." He gestured with the weapon, like how to harness the fire that sleeps within. Keela's expression hardened. "You defile our sacred places with stolen power, Oathbreaker." Vroctes laughed, the sound echoing unnaturally in the vast chamber. "There is no sacred hunter, only power, who claims it and who fears it." He took another step forward. "And now you have led us to the greatest power of all, the heart that whispers secrets of the stars." Jonas glanced at Keela, then back to the console behind him. If Vroctes gained control of a functioning precursor installation, the consequences could be devastating, not just for Keela's people, but potentially for inhabited systems throughout the sector. Precursor technology was notoriously unpredictable in untrained hands. Vroctes seemed to read Jonas's thoughts. "Step away from the heart, off-worlder. Your kind has hoarded star knowledge long enough. It is time for the true children of Lyrash to reclaim their birthright." "You're not ready for this technology," Jonas said, deliberately placing himself between the console and the bone hunters. "None of us are." It's dangerous in ways you can't imagine. Then you'll show us how to control it, Vroctes replied, aiming the energy weapon directly at Keela. Or watch your hunting partner die slowly. Keela didn't flinch. Her eyes locked on Vroctes with pure hatred. He's not my partner. He's my prey. Then his choice should be simple. Vroctes smiled cruelly. Help us, off-worlder, or watch as I remove her heart while it still beats. Jonas's mind raced. The standoff couldn't last. Vroctes had the numbers and the ranged weapon. Direct confrontation would likely end with both him and Keela dead, and the precursor technology in the hands of a sadistic exile with delusions of godhood. He needed a third option. The heart doesn't work that way, Jonas said, slowly reaching toward the console. It responds to specific genetic markers. Without the proper sequence, any attempt to activate it could trigger a defensive response. He was bluffing, of course. He had no idea how the console actually functioned, only that it contained components compatible with his communications technology. But the bluff bought him precious seconds to study the flowing patterns on the console's surface. There, a repeating sequence of symbols that corresponded to stellar coordinates. And beside them, what appeared to be an emergency shutdown protocol, if his limited knowledge of precursor interface design was correct. Vroctes' patience was visibly thinning. Enough words. Activate it now, or I start removing pieces of her. He gestured to one of his followers, who moved toward Keela with a serrated blade. Jonas made his decision. Meeting Keela's eyes briefly, he gave an almost imperceptible nod, hoping she would understand his intent. Then he placed both hands firmly on the console's surface. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The flowing patterns of light surged beneath his touch, racing outward to the circle of crystalline pillars. Each pillar began to pulse with increasing intensity, bathing the chamber in waves of coherent energy. What are you doing? Vroctes demanded, taking an involuntary step back as the energy built. What you asked, Jonas replied calmly, though his heart was racing. I'm activating the heart. The console was responding to his touch in ways he hadn't anticipated. The tracker in his pocket was now vibrating violently, its circuits overloading from proximity to the energy field. Jonas kept his hands firmly on the console's surface, focusing on the shutdown sequence he'd identified. But before he could complete it, Vroctes seemed to realize something was wrong. With a roar of rage, he fired his energy weapon directly at Jonas. Keela moved faster than Jonas thought possible. She lunged forward, intercepting the energy blast with her spear. The weapon shattered in a burst of light, the blast partially deflected but still catching her across the shoulder. She staggered but remained standing, placing herself between Jonas and the bone hunters. Complete your task, off-worlder, she hissed through clenched teeth. I will hold them. Jonas redoubled his efforts on the console as Keela engaged the bone hunters. Despite her injured shoulder, she moved with lethal grace, her remaining weapons a blur as she fought, to keep Vroctes and his followers at bay. The crystalline pillars were now pulsing in perfect synchronization, the energy between them coalescing into a visible field that encircled the dais. Jonas could feel the console's systems responding to his inputs, but something wasn't right. Instead of powering down, the heart seemed to be drawing more energy from some unseen source. Keela, he shouted over the rising hum of energy. I can't shut it down. We need to get out of here. She glanced back briefly, then returned to her desperate defense. She had managed to disable 2 of the bone hunters, but Vroctes and the remaining 2 were pressing her hard, and her wounded shoulder was clearly hampering her movements. The energy field was expanding, creating distortions in the air that rippled outward from the dais. Jonas's tracker suddenly emitted a high-pitched whine and then died completely, its circuits fried by the surging power. In that moment, Jonas understood what was happening. The heart wasn't just a communication device or data repository. It was a node in a much larger network, and he had inadvertently triggered some kind of emergency protocol. The system was preparing to purge itself. Everyone out, he shouted, abandoning the console and rushing toward Keela. The whole chamber is going to overload. The bone hunters hesitated, looking to Vroctes for direction. The exile leader's face contorted with rage and frustration. "No," he snarled. "The power will be mine." He shoved past his followers and charged directly toward the console. Jonas reached Keela, grabbing her uninjured arm. "We need to go. Now." For once, she didn't resist. Together, they ran toward the passage they had entered through as the energy field continued to expand behind them. The chamber's starscape ceiling was now pulsating wildly, casting strobing shadows across the fleeing figures. Vroctes reached the console and slammed his hands down upon it, his face illuminated by the surging energy patterns. For a moment, he stood triumphant. Then his expression changed to one of horror as the console's surface seemed to liquefy beneath his touch. The energy field contracted suddenly around him, becoming blindingly bright. Jonas and Keela reached the passage just as a shockwave of energy erupted from the dais. The blast threw them forward into the tunnel, heat and light washing over them as the chamber behind them was engulfed in purging energy. They stumbled further down the passage, debris raining down as the tunnel shook from secondary explosions. Behind them, the screams of the remaining bone hunters were abruptly silenced. After what seemed like an eternity, they reached a fork in the tunnel. Keela pulled Jonas down the right-hand path without hesitation, her grip surprisingly strong despite her injury. "This leads to the surface," she gasped. "The other way is collapsing." They ran through increasingly narrow passages, the sounds of destruction growing more distant behind them. Finally, they emerged onto a small ledge overlooking the forest. The night had fully fallen during their time underground, and Lyrash's 3 moons cast a silvery glow over the canopy below. They collapsed onto the ledge, breathing heavily. Jonas examined Keela's shoulder in the moonlight. The energy weapon had left an angry burn across her indigo skin, but the wound wasn't as deep as he had feared. "That was incredibly brave," he said quietly, intercepting that blast. Keela looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You were attempting to stop Vroctes. It was the tactically sound choice." Jonas smiled slightly. "Still, thank you." She nodded once, then gazed out over the moonlit forest. "The heart is lost. The council will not be pleased." "I'm sorry," Jonas said sincerely. "I never intended to damage it. I was trying to prevent Vroctes from gaining control. It was not meant for any hands." "Yours or his," Keela replied, but there was no accusation in her tone, only weariness. "Perhaps it is better this way. The ancestors' power should rest with the ancestors." They sat in silence for a moment, the events of the day settling around them like falling leaves. "Your communication device," Keela finally said. "It was destroyed." Jonas nodded, removing the fried tracker from his pocket. "Yes, and the component I needed went with the heart. So you cannot call your people. Not without building a new transmitter from scratch." Jonas leaned back against the rock face. "Which would take months, even if I had the proper materials." Keela was quiet for a long moment, her large eyes reflecting the moon's light. "There is another way," she said finally. "Another piece of sky metal, far to the west. It fell many cycles ago, before I was born. The council forbade anyone from approaching it, but it has remained untouched." Jonas straightened. "Another crash site? Intact?" "I believe so. I have seen it only from a distance, during a long hunt." She looked at him directly. "I could lead you there." "Why would you do that?" Jonas asked. "I thought I was still your prey." Keela's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "You are, but I have decided to delay your ending." She gestured to her injured shoulder. "As you said, it would be poor form to claim weakened prey." Jonas laughed softly, wincing at the pain in his side. "Fair enough. Though I'm not sure either of us is in peak condition at the moment." Keela rose to her feet, looking toward the distant horizon. "The council must be told of what happened here, of Vroctes' end and the heart's destruction." Her expression grew troubled, "and of the truth about the sky metal and the pale outsiders from before." "Will they listen?" Jonas asked. "I do not know." She offered him a hand up. "But first, we must survive the journey. The forest at night holds many dangers, and we are far from clan territory." Jonas accepted her hand, rising to stand beside her. "Lead the way, Hunter." I'll try to keep up. As they began their descent toward the forest below, Jonas found himself reflecting on the strange turns of fate. He had come to this world seeking only a means of escape, a way back to his ordered, familiar life in the core. Instead, he had stumbled into ancient mysteries and unexpected alliances. He glanced at Keela, moving sure-footed down the rocky path despite her injury. She was still technically his captor, still pledged to eventually take his life by tribal law. Yet he found himself trusting her more than many beings he'd encountered in his years of service. The twin suns would rise again in a few hours, bringing new challenges and dangers. But for now, in the silver moonlight, two hunters from different worlds moved as one through the darkness. For 3 days, they journeyed through the forest, keeping to high ridges and dense cover to avoid both natural predators and any remaining bone hunters who might have escaped the heart chamber's destruction. Keela's knowledge of the terrain proved invaluable, guiding them along hidden game trails and through passages invisible to untrained eyes. Despite her initial reluctance, Keela gradually shared more about her people and their ways. Jonas learned of the complex social structure of the clans, the spiritual significance they attached to hunting, and the elaborate ceremonies that marked major life transitions. In return, he told her of the Frontier Corps, its mission to explore and document new worlds, and the strict protocols that govern contact with developing civilizations. So your people watch from hiding, like stalkers in the darkness, Keela observed on the evening of the 3rd day, as they made camp in the hollow of a massive fallen tree. Observing, but never revealing yourselves. That's one way to put it, Jonas replied, tending the small cook fire Keela had taught him to build, smokeless and nearly invisible from more than a few meters away. The intention is to prevent cultural contamination, to allow civilizations to develop naturally without outside influence. Keela made a soft sound, somewhere between amusement and derision. Yet here you are, crashed on my world, leading me to question everything my elders have taught. Jonas couldn't argue with that. His mere presence was a violation of core directives, regardless of the crash being unintentional. Sometimes the universe has its own plans, he said finally. Protocols or not. They fell silent as Jonas distributed the meal, a stew made from roots Keela had gathered and small amphibious creatures she had caught in a nearby stream. It was far from core rations, but Jonas had to admit it tasted better. As they ate, Keela suddenly asked, "If I permitted you to leave, if you repaired your sky metal and returned to your people, what would you tell them of Lyrash?" The question caught Jonas off guard. He considered it carefully before responding. The truth, that it's home to an advanced indigenous civilization that should be left in peace. He met her gaze across the fire. "I would recommend designating Lyrash as a protected world, off-limits to all core operations and commercial interests. And they would honor this recommendation." In most cases, yes. Jonas set aside his empty bowl, especially with evidence of precursor technology. That alone would trigger special protocols. Keela nodded slowly, but doubt lingered in her expression. "And those who seek such technology, the scavengers you spoke of, would your rule stop them?" Jonas couldn't lie to her. Not always. There are those who operate outside core jurisdiction, independent salvagers, corporate explorers, treasure hunters. The core tries to intercept them, but space is vast. "Like the bone hunters," Keela murmured. "Exiles who follow no law but their own desire." "Yes," Jonas agreed. "Something like that." Keela was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. Finally, she said, "Tomorrow we will reach the edge of clan territory. My absence will have been noticed. Hunters will be searching. Will they shoot first and ask questions later?" Jonas asked, only half joking. "It depends on who finds us," Keela replied seriously. "Some will honor my hunt right and allow me to bring you to the council. Others may see only an off-worlder and act accordingly." She looked up at him. "You should be prepared." Jonas nodded. After everything they'd been through, the possibility of being killed by one of Keela's clanmates just before reaching relative safety seemed darkly ironic. "Any suggestions for improving my chances?" Keela studied him thoughtfully. Then she reached for her pack and withdrew a small pouch. From it, she produced several pots of colored paste and what appeared to be a thin bone needle. "The marks of a journey-bound hunter," she explained, uncapping one of the pots to reveal a deep blue paste that shimmered slightly in the firelight. "They will signal that you travel under protection for a specific purpose. Will that be enough? It should give pause to all but the most zealous." She dipped the needle into the paste. "But the marks must be placed precisely. Hold still." Jonas remained motionless as Keela applied the ceremonial markings to his face and hands. Her touch was surprisingly gentle, the needle creating superficial patterns that tingled slightly as the paste bonded with his skin. "These will fade after 7 days," she told him as she worked. "Long enough for our purpose." "And what happens after we reach the western crash site?" Jonas asked quietly. "Assuming I find what I need there." Keela's hands paused briefly, then continued their precise work. "I will fulfill my duty to the council. I will report what we have learned of the Heart's destruction and the Bone Hunter's plans." She completed a final mark on his right hand, then sat back to examine her work. "As for you, that will depend on many things, including whether you still consider me your prey," Jonas said. Keela capped her pots of paste and returned them to her pouch. "Rest now," she said, neither confirming nor denying his statement. "Tomorrow will test us both." As Jonas settled onto his makeshift bed of soft fronds, he caught Keela watching him with an unreadable expression. Despite everything, despite the lingering threat that she might still be planning to fulfill her original mission, he found himself trusting her. Perhaps it was foolish, but something had changed between them in the heart chamber, something neither of them had yet put into words. Sleep came quickly, his body still recovering from their ordeal. His last conscious thought was that, pray or not, he was glad to have Keela at his side for whatever challenges tomorrow would bring. The encounter with Keela's clan came sooner than expected. They had just crossed a shallow river at dawn when Keela suddenly froze, raising a hand for silence. Jonas immediately dropped into a crouch, scanning their surroundings for threats. "We are surrounded," Keela whispered, her posture shifting subtly into a formal stance Jonas hadn't seen before. "Council hunters. At least 6. Before Jonas could respond, figures materialized from the surrounding vegetation, indigo-skinned warriors similar to Keela, but with different marking patterns. Their weapons were trained on Jonas with unwavering precision. One stepped forward, a male with elaborate markings that covered most of his visible skin. His bearings suggested authority, and the ornaments adorning his weapons spoke of numerous successful hunts. "Keela, daughter of Maris," he said in their native language, which Jonas didn't understand. "You return with strange company." Keela responded in the same language, her tone formal but firm. The exchange continued for several minutes, occasionally growing heated. Jonas remained motionless, aware that his survival depended entirely on Keela's persuasive abilities. Finally, she turned to him. "Huntmaster Sorvin grants us passage to the council," she said in the trade language. "But you must surrender any weapons, and your hand will be bound." Jonas nodded slowly. "I understand." He carefully removed his utility knife, his only remaining weapon after depleting the pulsar, and held it out, handle first. 2 hunters approached cautiously, taking the knife and binding his wrists with supple vine cords. The bindings were secure, but not painfully tight, a professional job that Jonas could appreciate, even as the captive. "Tell them I mean no harm to your people," he said to Keela. "I'm grateful for the escort." She translated his words, which seemed to surprise the huntmaster. He responded with a question. He asked how an off-worlder speaks with respect rather than demands. Keela translated. "Tell him I've learned much from a skilled hunter who could have taken my life many times over, but chose wisdom instead," Jonas replied. "When?" Keela translated this. Several of the hunters exchanged glances. The huntmaster studied Jonas for a long moment, then gave a curt nod and issued commands to his hunters. "We move immediately," Keela told Jonas. "The council awaits at the Great Grove." The journey to the clan's territory took most of the day. They traveled at a brisk pace, the hunters forming a loose perimeter around Jonas and Keela. As they moved deeper into clan lands, Jonas observed subtle changes in the forest management. Pathways subtly maintained, certain plants clearly cultivated, strategic vantage points established. What had seemed like pristine wilderness was, in fact, a carefully tended ecosystem. By late afternoon, they reached the Great Grove, a massive clearing dominated by 12 colossal trees arranged in a perfect circle. Between the trees, suspended on an intricate network of bridges and platforms, was a village unlike any Jonas had seen on habitable worlds. The dwellings were seamlessly integrated with the living trees, constructed of materials that seemed to blur the line between grown and built. Hundreds of Keela's people moved through this three-dimensional community. Some paused in their activities to watch as the hunting party escorted the off-worlder through their midst. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to outright hostility. At the center of the grove, on a raised platform accessible by a spiral staircase that wrapped around the largest tree's trunk, waited the Council of Elders. 7 figures sat in carved wooden chairs, 4 females and 3 males, all bearing the weight of many cycles in their weathered features and elaborate markings. In the center sat Elder Theris, whom Keela had mentioned as the one who assigned her original mission. Her eyes, bright despite her ancient appearance, fixed on Jonas with penetrating intensity. The Huntmaster led them to the base of the spiral staircase, then stepped aside. Keela nodded to Jonas, indicating he should follow her up. Despite his bound hands, he managed the ascent without difficulty, aware that dozens of eyes tracked his every movement. When they reached the platform, Keela performed a formal gesture of respect to the council, then began to speak in their native language. Jonas could only watch and wait as she delivered what appeared to be a detailed report. Occasionally, she gestured to him or to her own injuries, which were still healing. The elders listened without interruption, their expressions revealing little. When Keela finished, Elder Theris asked several questions, her voice carrying the weight of authority despite its age-roughened quality. Finally, Theris turned her attention to Jonas. "Off-worlder," she said in perfect trade language, surprising him. Keela tells a strange tale of cooperation, danger, and destruction. She claims you sought to protect the heart rather than exploit it, and that together you defeated the exile Vroctes, who threatened all our people. Jonas inclined his head respectfully. "Elder, what she has told you is true. I came to your world by accident, seeking only to repair my communications equipment and leave. I had no knowledge of the heart until we discovered it together." Theris studied him with those penetrating eyes. "Yet now you seek another piece of sky metal, one our laws have forbidden anyone to approach." "Yes, Elder. Without it, I have no way to leave your world. I would be stranded here permanently." A murmur ran through the council at this. One of the male elders leaned forward, speaking rapidly in their language. Theris responded, and a brief debate ensued among the council members. Keela remained silent during this exchange, her posture formal, but her eyes darting between Jonas and the elders. Whatever was being discussed clearly concerned her. Finally, Theris raised a hand, silencing the debate. "The council must deliberate on this matter in private," she announced. "Keela, you will remain as witness. The off-worlder will be taken to the contemplation chamber until we have reached our decision." 2 guards stepped forward to escort Jonas. Before he was led away, he looked to Keela, searching for some indication of what would happen next. Her expression remained carefully neutral, but as he turned to follow the guards, she spoke quickly in the trade language. "Tell them the truth, Jonas. All of it is our only path forward." The contemplation chamber proved to be a surprisingly comfortable room within the hollow of one of the giant trees. Though the door was guarded, Jonas wasn't restrained further, and his bonds were even removed. Food and water were provided, along with a basin for washing and fresh medicinal paste for his healing wound. As night fell, bioluminescent organisms embedded in the walls provided soft light. Jonas sat on the woven mat that served as a bed, reviewing his options. They were, he had to admit, limited. Without Keela's help, he'd never find the Western crash site. Without components from that site, he'd never repair his communications equipment. And without a functioning communicator, the Corps would eventually declare him missing, presumed dead. He was completely at the mercy of the Council's decision. Hours passed. Jonas dozed intermittently, his core training allowing him to rest despite the uncertainty of his situation. He was awakened by the sound of the door opening. Keela entered, looking exhausted but resolute. Behind her came Elder Theris and 2 other council members. "Rise, Jonas of the Frontier Corps," Theris said, using his full name and affiliation for the first time. "The council has reached its decision." Jonas stood, bracing himself for whatever judgment they had passed. "Keela has told us much of your journey together," Theris continued, "of your actions at the Heart Chamber, and of the revelations concerning our own history." She stepped closer, her ancient eyes searching his face. "She has also spoken of your Corps' rules regarding worlds like ours, and the protection such designation might offer." "Everything I told Keela about Corps protocols is true," Jonas affirmed. "I would formally recommend Lyrash be classified as a protected world, with all the safeguards it entails." Theris nodded slowly. "We have consulted the remaining ancient records and the memories of our oldest members. The truth we have pieced together suggests our people were indeed travelers among stars, as you surmised. The heart was part of our ancestors' legacy, a link to the network of worlds they once inhabited." One of the other elders, a male with intricate spiral patterns covering his scalp, spoke up. "The outsiders from 7 generations past were not your Corps, but scavengers seeking the technology of our ancestors. They came with false promises and left with stolen knowledge, after much bloodshed." "That matches what I suspected," Jonas said. "There are many who hunt precursor technology for profit or power. My organization tries to prevent such exploitation, but we can't be everywhere." Theris made a gesture that Jonas interpreted as acknowledgement. "The Council has decided to permit you access to the Western crash site, under specific conditions." Jonas felt a surge of hope. "Name them." "First, you will be accompanied by Keela, who will continue to bear responsibility for your actions on our world." Theris glanced at Keela, who inclined her head in acceptance of this duty. "Second, you will take nothing from the site except what is necessary for your departure. All other technology remains untouched." "Agreed," Jonas said without hesitation. "Third," Theris continued, her voice taking on a more solemn tone, "you will carry a message to your Corps leaders from the Council of Lyrash. A formal request for the protection you have described, and a warning about the scavengers who may seek our ancestors' knowledge. I will deliver your message personally," Jonas promised. "And finally," Theris said, "you will vow never to return to Lyrash yourself. One journey has been permitted by fate. A second would tempt powers best left undisturbed." This last condition gave Jonas pause. He glanced at Keela, whose expression remained carefully neutral. Something unspoken passed between them in that brief look, an acknowledgement of paths that might have been. "I accept all conditions," Jonas said finally, returning his attention to Theris. "And I thank the Council for its wisdom and mercy." Theris nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Preparations will be made for your journey to the Western site. You will depart at first light." She turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing, off-worlder. While you journey to the crash site, Keela's hunt remains unresolved. Remember this." With that cryptic reminder, the elders departed, leaving Jonas alone with Keela. "What did she mean by that?" Jonas asked once they were alone. "About your hunt remaining unresolved?" Keela moved to the window, looking out at the bioluminescent patterns that illuminated the grove at night. "It means the Council has not rescinded my original mission," she said quietly. "I'm still bound by duty to complete it." "To kill me," Jonas clarified. She turned to face him, her expression complex. "Yes, though they have left the timing to my discretion." Jonas absorbed this information. "So after I repair my communicator, the hunt resumes," Keela finished for him. In theory." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Much has changed since I first climbed that tree to strike you down. The Council knows this, which is why they have given me discretion." She approached him slowly. They test us both, Jonas of the core. They test your honor in keeping your vows, and my judgment in fulfilling my duty. Jonas met her gaze steadily. And what does your judgment tell you, Keela of Lyrash? She stopped just short of him, close enough that he could see the subtle patterns in her irises, concentric rings of deep violet and midnight blue. It tells me that some hunts have purposes beyond the kill, she said softly. And that wisdom sometimes lies in knowing when not to strike. Before Jonas could respond, she stepped back, resuming a more formal posture. Rest now. The journey to the western crash site will be challenging. The territory is less familiar to me, and dangers await that even the council may not anticipate. She moved toward the door, but paused before exiting. Whatever comes after, Jonas, know that you have earned the respect of a hunter of Lyrash. Few off-worlders can claim such honor. With that, she was gone, leaving Jonas with more questions than answers about what their future held. The journey to the western crash site took 7 days. They traveled light, carrying only what was necessary for survival and for Jonas's planned repairs. 2 additional hunters accompanied them for the first 3 days, until they reached the edge of clan territory, where ceremonial markers delineated the boundary between familiar lands and the uncharted western reaches. Here, the additional escorts turned back, leaving Keela and Jonas to continue alone into territories less frequented by her people. The forest gradually changed character, the massive purple-bark trees giving way to sparser vegetation and rolling hills. Strange rock formations jutted from the landscape like the vertebrae of ancient beasts, their surfaces carved by wind and time into fantastical shapes. The ancestors' spine, Keela named them as they passed through a natural archway formed by 2 leaning monoliths. Legend says they're the bones of the great sky beasts that brought our people to Lyrash in the before time. Jonas studied the formations with professional interest. They could be remnants of an artificial structure, he observed, exposed and eroded over thousands of years. Keela glanced at him. You see machines where we see magic. Not at all, Jonas replied. I see the incredible achievements of your ancestors, whose technology was advanced enough to seem like magic to later generations. He ran a hand along one of the stone surfaces, feeling the subtle patterns etched deep within. There's no less wonder in that. Keela seemed to consider this as they continued their journey. Their conversations had grown more philosophical as they traveled, ranging from the nature of duty to the meaning of home. Jonas found himself sharing personal details he rarely disclosed. His childhood on the archipelago world of Nyama, his reasons for joining the Frontier Corps, his occasional doubts about the Corps' non-interference policies. In return, Keela spoke of her training as a hunter, the death of her mother in a hunt gone wrong, and her complex feelings about council traditions that sometimes seemed rooted more in fear than wisdom. The elders fear change, she admitted as they made camp on the 6th night, within view of their destination, a distant glint of metal nestled in a valley still a day's journey away. They have preserved our people through generations of isolation, but at what cost? We forget our own history, turning truth into legend. Change always brings risk, Jonas said, tending the small fire they'd built in the shelter of a rock outcropping. But stagnation guarantees slow decline. Keela nodded, her expression thoughtful as she cleaned her weapons. A ritual she performed each evening regardless of whether she'd used them that day. Perhaps that is what the Council truly fears in off-worlders. Not destruction, but transformation. The end of what we have been, even if it leads to something new. And what do you fear, Keela? Jonas asked softly. She looked up from her task, meeting his eyes across the fire. I used to fear failure, dishonor, falling short of what was expected of me. She set aside her spear, the cleaning complete. Now I fear making the wrong choice when all paths seem to lead away from what I once believed. The honesty of her answer caught Jonas by surprise. Before he could respond, she continued, And you, Jonas of the Corps? What does a man who travels between stars fear in the darkness? He considered the question seriously. Meaninglessness, he said finally, making no difference despite all effort. returning home to discover it's no longer home. Keela tilted her head slightly. You speak of home, yet you told me you have no permanent dwelling, no clan bond. Home isn't always a place, Jonas replied. Sometimes it's a purpose, a sense of belonging to something larger than yourself. Like my duty to the clan, Keela said, understanding in her voice. Similar, yes, though perhaps with more choice involved. Jonas added another small branch to the fire. At least in theory. They fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts as night fully enveloped the landscape around them. Above, Lyrash's 3 moons sailed through a star-studded sky, a reminder of the vastness in which their 2 very different worlds existed. Tomorrow we reach the crash site, Keela said eventually. If you find what you need. When I find what I need, Jonas corrected gently. When, she acknowledged with a slight nod. What then? Then I repair my communicator and send a signal to the core. A ship would be dispatched for extraction, probably arriving within 3 to 5 days, depending on patrol patterns. And during those days, does your hunt resume? The question was asked casually, but Jonas could hear the weight behind it. He met her gaze across the dying fire. I've been thinking about that, about what Elder Theris said regarding your unresolved hunt. And I think perhaps we've been looking at it backward, Jonas said carefully. When we first met, you climbed that tree to strike, but I waited below, already knowing you were there. I was never truly your prey, Keela. We were always 2 hunters circling each other. A smile slowly formed on Keela's lips, the most unguarded expression he'd seen from her. An interesting interpretation, one the council might not share. The council gave you discretion, Jonas reminded her. They must trust your judgment. Perhaps. Keela's smile faded, replaced by something more solemn. Or perhaps they expect me to complete my mission regardless of my personal considerations. The implication hung between them, an acknowledgement of the connection that had grown during their shared ordeal, despite the circumstances that had brought them together. Get some rest, Keela said finally, rising to her feet. I'll take first watch. Tomorrow will test us both. Dawn brought them to the crash site, the remains of what Jonas immediately recognized as a Frontier Corps survey vessel, though of a design at least 30 years outdated. The ship had plowed a long furrow through the valley before coming to rest against a cliff face, partially buried by a subsequent rock slide. This isn't a rescue craft, Jonas said as they approached cautiously. It's a long-range survey ship, EC class, by the look of it. Is that significant? Keela asked, scanning their surroundings with a hunter's vigilance. Very. These weren't supposed to make planetfall. They conducted orbital surveys only. Jonas examined the visible portions of the hull, noting blast damage that didn't match typical crash patterns. This ship was attacked, driven down deliberately. By whom? That's the question. Jonas located what appeared to be an access point, a maintenance hatch that had sprung partially open during the crash. I need to get inside, see if the logs are intact. Keela nodded, though her posture remained alert. Something doesn't feel right, she murmured. There are no animal sounds. No insects. Everything is too quiet. Jonas paused, realizing she was correct. Since entering the valley, the normal background chorus of Lyrash's wildlife had fallen silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Could be residual energy from the ship affecting local life, he suggested, though he didn't entirely believe it. Core vessels were designed to be environmentally neutral after shutdown. Or something is watching us, Keela countered. She unslung her spear, holding it ready. Proceed, but quickly. Jonas nodded, turning his attention back to the hatch. Using his utility knife, returned to him before their departure from clan territory, he pried the damaged panel further open, creating enough space to squeeze through. The interior was dark and angled awkwardly due to the ship's position. Emergency lighting had long since failed, leaving only what daylight filtered through the open hatch and various breaches in the hull. The air was stale but breathable, with a faint metallic undertone. I need to reach the command center, Jonas called back to Keela, who remained at the entrance, dividing her attention between him and their surroundings. Should be forward, up this corridor. He navigated carefully through the tilted passageways, stepping over debris and collapsed internal structures. The ship had been abandoned in haste. Personal effects were still in crew quarters, meals half-eaten in the small galley area. Whatever had happened, it had occurred quickly. The command center was in better condition than Jonas had dared hope. Though the viewports were shattered and one entire console was crushed beneath a support beam, the main systems appeared largely intact. Most importantly, the communications array control panel showed only minor damage. "This is it," he murmured to himself, kneeling to examine the panel. If the core components are intact, he carefully pried open the access cover, revealing the sophisticated guts of the communication system. There, nestled among circuit boards and power couplings, was exactly what he'd been seeking: a quantum resonance node, the critical component needed to repair his own equipment. As he reached for it, his eye caught something on a nearby console, a flashing indicator light, barely visible beneath a layer of dust. Something on the ship was still active, still drawing power after all these years. Curious, Jonas brushed away the dust, revealing an emergency log recorder, a black box equivalent designed to preserve critical data even if the main computer was destroyed. And it was still functioning, though barely, on reserve power. "Jonas!" Keela's urgent call echoed from the entrance. "We must leave. Now, just a minute," he called back, already connecting his personal datapad to the log recorder. "I found something important." "We are not alone," came her tense reply. "There is movement in the trees at the valley's edge." That accelerated Jonas's actions. He initiated a rapid data transfer, watching as decades-old logs began flowing into his device. Simultaneously, he carefully extracted the quantum resonance node, securing it in a protective case from his pack. The data transfer reached 70% when a new sound reached him, a high-pitched whine that raised the hair on the back of his neck. It was a sound no Lyrash creature would make. It was mechanical. "Jonas!" Keela's voice now held genuine alarm. "Coming." He disconnected his datapad, the transfer incomplete but substantial enough to be useful. Grabbing his pack, he made his way quickly back through the ship's corridors. He emerged to find Keela in a defensive stance, her spear pointed toward the tree line. Following her gaze, Jonas saw what had triggered her hunter's instincts, a glint of metal moving between the trees, too regular to be natural. "Drones," he said grimly, recognizing the distinctive movement pattern. "Automated scouts." "Whose?" Keela demanded, not lowering her weapon. "Not core design." Jonas's mind raced through possibilities. Could be salvagers or corporate explorers. Either way, they're not supposed to be here. They approach the ship, Keela observed. Perhaps they seek what you sought. Likely, though they might not know anyone beat them to it. Jonas checked to make sure the resonance node was secure in his pack. "We need to leave before their controller arrive." "Too late," Keela said softly. Following her gaze, Jonas saw a shuttle descending into the valley from above, a sleek, predatory craft of unfamiliar design. It bore no core markings, nor any identifiable corporate logos. Just a simple emblem of a stylized eye. Seekers, Jonas breathed, recognition dawning. Independent salvagers with a reputation for extreme methods. They're after precursor tech. Probably detected this crash site the same way I tracked the heart. The shuttle touched down 100 meters from their position, its engines cycling down to a low hum. The side hatch opened, and 5 figures emerged. All human or near human, all heavily armed with weapons that made Jonas's depleted pulsar look like a child's toy. "Options?" Keela asked tersely, her body coiled for action. Jonas assessed their situation rapidly. "They outnumber and outgun us. Fighting would be suicide. Hiding, then? The forest offers. Their drones would track us." Jonas cut her off. "And they'd have no reason to take prisoners." "Then what?" For the first time since he'd met her, Keela sounded uncertain. Jonas made his decision. "We talk. I'll handle this." Before Keela could object, he stepped forward, hands raised to show he carried no weapons. "Hello there," he called to the approaching figures. "Quite a coincidence, finding other humans out here." The salvagers paused, weapons not quite pointed at him, but certainly ready. The leader, a tall woman with a cybernetic eye implant visible on the left side of her face, stepped forward. "Core," she called back, her voice carrying easily across the distance. "Independent researcher," Jonas lied smoothly. "Jonas Varda. My shuttle crashed about 20 clicks east of here. Been surviving with help from the locals." He gestured toward Keela, who remained tensely vigilant. The leader approached closer, her augmented eye visibly scanning him. "Long way from charted space, researcher." Her tone made it clear she didn't believe his cover story. "Got lost in a plasma storm," Jonas improvised. "Navigation went haywire. Lucky to be alive, honestly." "Very lucky," the woman agreed with a predatory smile. "And now you just happen to be an old core wreck that our scanners only detected 3 days ago." Jonas shrugged, maintaining his facade of casual friendliness. "Saw the metal reflection from a ridge back there. Thought it might have parts one could salvage for repairs." He patted his pack. "Found a few useful bits." The leader's cybernetic eye narrowed. "I bet you did." She gestured to her team, who spread out slightly, taking strategic positions. "Thing is, Mr. Independent Researcher, this wreck is now Seeker property, along with anything taken from it." "No problem," Jonas said easily. "I'm just looking to get off-world. Maybe we can help each other out. I've been mapping the local territory, learning about indigenous species. Could be valuable information." The leader seemed to consider this, though her expression remained suspicious. "And your native friend? She just happens to be fine with off-worlders looting her planet." Before Jonas could answer, Keela stepped forward, speaking in perfect trade language. "I guide. I protect. It is my duty." She deliberately thickened her accent, playing into human expectations of primitive natives. Jonas fought to keep his surprise from showing. Keela was adapting quickly, following his lead in this dangerous improvisation. "See? Local guide," Jonas said with a casual gesture. "Saved my life more than once." Incredible what you can communicate with a few simple gestures and shared experiences. The Seeker leader looked between them, clearly weighing options and potential threats. Finally, she made a decision. "All right, researcher, you want off-world, we can arrange that. In exchange for whatever you've salvaged from our wreck and any information you've gathered about this planet." She smiled thinly. "Especially anything about local technology." Jonas feigned relief. "Deal. Though I should warn you, there's not much tech here worth salvaging. These people are primitive, spears and loincloths level of development. We'll be the judge of that." The leader gestured toward their shuttle. "After you." Jonas nodded, moving toward the shuttle with careful steps. "Coming, Key," he called to Keela, using a shortened version of her name that might pass as a simple native designation to the Seekers. Keela hesitated for just a moment, her eyes meeting his. A silent communication passed between them. "Trust me," his gaze said. She gave an almost imperceptible nod and followed. As they boarded the shuttle, Jonas's mind was already racing ahead. The Seekers would demand the quantum resonance node, of course, but he might be able to negotiate safe passage off-world in exchange. More concerning was what would happen once they discovered his core affiliation, something their equipment would eventually detect despite his cover story. And then there was Keela. The Seekers might see her as nothing more than a primitive native guide, but if they learned of the heart chamber or suspected her people possessed precursor knowledge. The shuttle door sealed behind them with an ominous hiss. Whatever happened next, Jonas knew one thing with certainty. Their journey together was approaching its most dangerous phase yet. Inside the shuttle, the Seekers directed Jonas and Keela to a small compartment near the cargo hold. Not quite a cell, but definitely designed for containing potentially troublesome passengers. 2 guards remained with them as the shuttle lifted off, its engines powering up with a deep vibration that Jonas felt through the deck plates. "Where exactly are we going?" he asked one of the guards, maintaining his facade of cautious cooperation. "Main ship's in orbit," the guard replied curtly. "Standard procedure for salvage operations." Jonas nodded as if this explained everything. A ship in orbit meant broader scanning capabilities, more personnel, and, unfortunately, better means of identifying him as core. His window for action was shrinking rapidly. Beside him, Keela sat with a stillness that would have appeared passive to an untrained observer. But Jonas recognized the controlled tension in her posture, a predator assessing, calculating, waiting for the precise moment to strike. Her eyes constantly moved, cataloging details of their surroundings. Through the small viewport in their compartment, Jonas watched the landscape of Lyrash fall away beneath them. The massive purple forest, the ancient spine-like rock formations, the distant shimmering of the clan territories, all receding as the shuttle climbed toward the stars that Keela's people had once traveled among generations ago. A sharp turn in the shuttle's trajectory brought a new view into the viewport. A vessel hanging in low orbit, its angular form bristling with sensor arrays and docking apparatuses. Not particularly large by core standards, but impressive for an independent salvage operation. "That's quite a ship for simple salvagers," Jonas commented, testing how much information the guards might volunteer. One guard snorted. "The Oculus isn't a simple anything." The name confirmed Jonas's suspicions. The Oculus was infamous in core intelligence briefings, a salvage vessel that had been linked to several high-profile technological thefts and at least 2 instances of violent conflict with indigenous populations that happened to be sitting on valuable precursor ruins. As the shuttle aligned for docking, Jonas leaned closer to Keela, speaking softly under the cover of the engine noise. "When we dock, stay close to me. First chance we get, we need to access a communications terminal." Keela gave a slight nod, then whispered back, "They will take your pack. The important piece you found." "Let them," Jonas replied. "Getting a message out is more important now." The shuttle shuddered slightly as docking clamps engaged. Through the viewport, Jonas could see the Oculus's docking bay enveloping them, mechanical arms securing the smaller craft in place. "On your feet," one of the guards ordered as the engines powered down. "The captain wants to meet our unexpected guests." They were escorted from the shuttle into the main ship, where the sterile corridors and utilitarian design spoke of function over comfort. Crew members, a mix of humans and near-humans from various worlds, watched them pass with undisguised curiosity. Clearly, visitors were uncommon aboard the Oculus. The Seeker leader, who Jonas now assumed was the captain, waited for them in what appeared to be a combination office and analysis lab. Various artifacts and technological components were displayed in secure cases along one wall, trophies from previous salvage operations. Multiple screens showed data feeds, including what looked like atmospheric analysis of Lyrash and scanning results from the crash site. "Welcome aboard the Oculus, Mr. Varda," the captain said, her cybernetic eye gleaming under the harsh lighting. "I'm Captain Rhea Voss." She gestured to the guard. "The pack, please." The guard removed Jonas's backpack, handing it to a waiting technician who immediately began examining its contents on a nearby workstation. "Now," Voss continued, "let's dispense with the convenient fiction that you're an independent researcher, shall we? My scanners identified core biomarkers in your blood the moment you came within range." Her expression hardened. "What's a Frontier Corps operative doing alone on an uncontacted world?" Jonas abandoned his cover story. It had served its purpose in getting them aboard. "Crashed, as I said. Scout ship malfunctioned during a routine survey." "And the native?" Voss nodded toward Keela, who was standing completely still, her alien features drawing curious glances from the Oculus crew. "I encountered her clan while seeking shelter," Jonas said, sticking as close to truth as possible. "They agreed to help me reach salvageable technology in exchange for my leaving their territories afterward." Voss studied Keela with newfound interest. "Intelligent enough for complex negotiation, then?" "Interesting. Most reports suggested primitive development." "Captain," the technician called from the workstation. "You want to see this?" He held up the quantum resonance node Jonas had recovered from the crash site. Voss took the component, examining it with obvious recognition. EC-class communications node. Exactly what would be needed to restore basic interstellar communications capability. Her gaze returned to Jonas, sharper now. "And this data device? What's on it?" The technician already had Jonas's datapad connected to a terminal. "Ship logs, Captain, from the crash site." but they're incomplete, many corrupted or missing sections. Recovery analysis, Jonas said quickly. Standard procedure for a core operative encountering historical wreckage. The site appears to be from an EC-class survey vessel that went missing approximately 30 years ago. Yes, about that. Voss set down the component and leaned against her desk. Strange coincidence, finding you at that particular wreck. Almost as if you knew it was there before we did. Jonas maintained a neutral expression. As I said, I was looking for salvageable communications components. The indigenous people knew of several crash sites from their oral histories. This was simply the closest. Several crash sites, Voss repeated, interest evident in her voice. And tell me, did the natives mention anything about ancient technology? Ruins? Unusual energy signatures? Before Jonas could fabricate an appropriate response, the technician interrupted again. Captain, I've managed to decode some of the log fragments. This isn't just any EC-class vessel. It's the Artemis. The name clearly meant something to Voss. Her expression shifted from predatory interest to genuine surprise. The Artemis? You're certain? Registry codes confirm it, the technician replied. Voss turned back to Jonas, a new calculation evident in her gaze. Well, Core Man, it seems you've stumbled onto something far more valuable than a simple communications node. She paused, as if deciding how much to reveal. The Artemis disappeared 32 years ago while investigating an anomalous energy signature in this sector. A signature consistent with a major precursor installation. Jonas kept his face carefully blank, though his mind was racing. The Artemis's mission would explain how it ended up on Lyrash, and potentially why the planet had been marked as unexplored in core records despite previous contact. Something had happened to erase or classify all record of the Artemis's findings. I was simply looking for parts to repair my communicator, Jonas said, maintaining his stance of limited knowledge. Whatever mission the Artemis was on is historical data to me. Perhaps, Voss replied, clearly unconvinced, but it's current priority to my operation. She gestured to her guards. Secure them in the holding cell while we analyze this data further. And prep a ground team. If the Artemis found something on this planet, we're going to find it too. As they were led from the lab, Jonas caught Voss issuing further orders. Full planetary scan focused on energy signatures. Compare with the Artemis data. And get me everything you can on the native population distribution. The holding cell was small but clean, with 2 narrow bunks and basic sanitation facilities. Once the guards departed, Keela immediately began examining every corner of the space with methodical precision. No obvious surveillance, she concluded after a thorough inspection, though there may be sensors we cannot detect. Jonas nodded, impressed by her adaptation to the technological environment. You're taking all this remarkably well, he observed quietly. First time off-world, aboard an alien vessel. Keela paused in her examination of the door mechanism. The Elder's stories speak of our ancestors traveling metal paths between stars. Perhaps some memory of it remains in our blood. She met his eyes. Besides, a strange cave is still a cave, whether made of stone or metal. Despite their dire circumstances, Jonas smiled. A hunter's perspective. Indeed, Keela returned to the door, studying its locking mechanism. Can we escape? Jonas shook his head. Not easily, and not yet. But I don't think Voss intends to harm us immediately. We have information she wants about the crash site, about Lyrash. About the heart, Keela said grimly. If they scan with their machines, will they detect where it was? Possibly. The energy release during its destruction would have left traces. Jonas sat on one of the bunks, considering their options. I need to get to a communications terminal. If I can send a secure burst transmission to the nearest core outpost, they'd dispatch a patrol immediately. And these salvagers would be forced to leave? Keela asked. The Corps takes jurisdiction violations very seriously, especially when precursor technology might be involved. Jonas didn't add that it might already be too late. If Voss's ground teams deployed before help arrived, they could do significant damage in their search for precursor artifacts. Keela sat beside him, her normally fluid movements betraying a hint of tension. Jonas, she said quietly, if these salvagers reach my clan's territories seeking the heart. I know. He didn't need her to finish the thought. The Seekers wouldn't hesitate to use force against indigenous resistance, especially with valuable technology at stake. They sat in silence for a moment, the gravity of their situation settling between them. Then Keela spoke again, her voice taking on a formal quality. Among my people, when a hunter faces a worthy adversary, one that cannot be defeated through strength alone, there is a tradition called the sacrifice play. She turned to face him fully. The hunter creates an opening by offering something the adversary cannot resist. Jonas studied her expression, understanding dawning. You're suggesting we create a diversion. I am suggesting I create a diversion, Keela corrected. You said yourself, reaching a communication device is our priority. I can provide that opportunity. No, Jonas said immediately. It's too dangerous. These people won't hesitate to use lethal force if threatened. Keela's expression softened slightly. Jonas of the Corps, did you forget? I'm still your hunter. My duty remains unresolved. A smile touched her lips. Perhaps this is how it was always meant to end. Not with your death at my hands, but with my sacrifice to ensure your mission succeeds. Before Jonas could formulate a response, the cell door slid open. Captain Voss stood in the doorway, flanked by guards. Your native friend, she said without preamble. I want her to identify locations on our planetary survey. Specifically, any sites of cultural or historical significance to her people. Keela rose smoothly to her feet, her posture shifting subtly to the more primitive stance she had adopted earlier. Jonas stood as well, positioning himself slightly in front of her. She doesn't understand complex technological concepts, he said. Let me help translate. Voss's cybernetic eye narrowed. Fine. Both of you then. She turned and strode away, clearly expecting them to follow under guard. As they walked through the corridors of the Ocal,